Have you ever noticed that some of the biggest financial problems don't arrive with a crash? They arrive quietly, no breaking news, no emergency announcement, no moment where someone steps in front of a camera and says, "The danger has begun." Instead, the warning signs build slowly, year after year, decision after decision, debt after debt. And by the time most people recognize what's happening, the process is already far advanced. Today, I want to discuss a subject that almost nobody wants to think about because it challenges one of the most deeply held assumptions in modern finance. The assumption that debt can always be managed. The assumption that governments can continue borrowing indefinitely without consequences. The assumption that the system will somehow work itself out. History suggests otherwise. And if you study the rise and decline of nations, empires, currencies, and financial systems, you'll find a pattern that repeats over and over again. The pattern begins with prosperity. Prosperity creates confidence. Confidence encourages borrowing. Borrowing creates growth. Growth encourages more borrowing. And eventually, debt grows faster than the income needed to support it. That is when the cycle changes. Not suddenly, gradually, almost invisibly, until one day everyone realizes that the rules have changed. What many people fail to understand is that debt itself is not the problem. Debt can be productive. Debt can fund innovation. Debt can build infrastructure. Debt can create opportunities that otherwise wouldn't exist. The problem begins when debt compounds faster than productivity, when obligations rise faster than the economy's ability to generate income, when more borrowing is required simply to service existing borrowing. That is the point where a healthy system begins transforming into something much more dangerous. And according to many long-term indicators, we may already be entering that phase. Before we continue, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. These discussions focus on timeless principles, economic cycles, and wealth preservation strategies that often get overlooked during periods of optimism. Now let's continue. One of the greatest misconceptions about financial crises is that they arrive without warning. In reality, almost every major financial disruption was preceded by years of visible signals. The signals were there. People simply chose not to see them. Why? Because during the early stages of a debt problem, life often appears normal. Markets can rise, employment can remain strong, consumer spending can continue, asset prices can even reach record highs. This creates a dangerous illusion. People begin believing that rising debt doesn't matter, that the old rules no longer apply, that this time is different. But history rarely changes its nature. What changes are the details. The mechanics remain surprisingly similar. Eventually, debt reaches a point where servicing costs begin consuming a larger share of available resources. Think about it like a household. Imagine a family that earns a comfortable income. At first, taking on debt helps them. A mortgage buys a home. A business loan expands opportunities. Everything works. But if borrowing continues year after year, eventually interest payments begin consuming more and more of their income. At first, the impact is barely noticeable. Then choices become harder. Then flexibility disappears. Then almost every financial decision revolves around managing existing obligations. The same principle applies on a much larger scale. The numbers are bigger. The timeline is longer. But the mathematics are identical. When debt expands faster than income, something eventually has to adjust. Either income grows dramatically, spending declines, defaults occur, or the value of money changes. History shows that policymakers usually prefer the last option because it appears less painful. Instead of explicitly reducing obligations, they reduce the purchasing power of the currency itself. Most people think inflation is simply rising prices. That's not the full picture. Inflation is also a mechanism through which debt burdens can be reduced over time. If money becomes less valuable, Fixed debts become easier to repay. From a policy perspective, this can seem attractive. But from the perspective of savers, it creates an entirely different problem. The money they spent years accumulating buys less. The purchasing power they thought was secure slowly erodes. And because the process happens gradually, many people don't recognize it until significant damage has already occurred. This is why understanding debt cycles is so important. They affect nearly every aspect of economic life. Interest rates, asset prices, real estate, stocks, bonds, currencies, even geopolitical relationships. When debt levels rise to extremes, the effects spread throughout the entire system. Now here's something that often surprises people. The most dangerous period is not always when markets are falling. Sometimes the most dangerous period is when markets are making new highs, because rising asset prices create confidence. Confidence encourages risk-taking. Risk-taking encourages leverage. Leverage increases vulnerability, and vulnerability remains hidden until conditions change. Many investors interpret rising markets as proof that everything is healthy, but markets often reflect liquidity conditions rather than economic strength. Those are not always the same thing. History contains many examples where financial assets surged while underlying structural problems continued growing. Eventually, reality catches up. Not because investors suddenly become irrational, but because mathematics eventually imposes constraints. Debt cannot compound faster than income forever. No system has escaped that reality. Not ancient empires, not modern economies, not corporations, not households. The specifics differ. The principle remains constant. This brings us to another important question. If debt problems are becoming more visible, what should ordinary people do? The answer is not panic. Panic is rarely useful. The goal is resilience. Resilience means preparing for multiple possible outcomes. It means recognizing that certainty is an illusion. Nobody knows exactly what will happen. Nobody knows the precise timing. Nobody can predict every policy response. What we can do is improve our ability to withstand uncertainty. That begins with diversification. Not because diversification guarantees success, but because concentration increases vulnerability. When people become overly dependent on one asset, one country, one income source, or one assumption, they expose themselves to risks they may not fully understand. The future belongs to those who build flexibility, those who prepare rather than predict, those who focus on principles instead of headlines. Another lesson from history is that periods of disruption often create extraordinary opportunities. This may sound contradictory, but it isn't. Every major transition in economic history created both winners and losers. The difference usually came down to preparation. Those who understood the changing environment adapted. Those who assumed yesterday's conditions would continue indefinitely often struggled. The coming years may require more adaptability than many investors have experienced during their lifetimes. The world is changing. Debt dynamics are changing. Monetary conditions are changing. Global relationships are changing. And successful wealth preservation will likely require a broader perspective than simply chasing the latest trend. Think about what truly creates lasting wealth. It isn't speculation. It isn't prediction. It isn't finding a magic investment. It's the ability to compound value over long periods while surviving inevitable disruptions. Survival matters, because opportunities only belong to those who remain in the game. The biggest financial mistakes often come from ignoring risk during periods of optimism. People assume good conditions will continue forever. History teaches a different lesson. Everything moves in cycles: expansion, contraction, confidence, fear, boom, correction. And those who understand cycles gain a significant advantage over those who believe current conditions are permanent. The goal is not to fear the future. The goal is to understand it, to recognize the forces shaping it, to position yourself intelligently, and to remain adaptable as events unfold. Because in the end, wealth is not merely about how much money you make. It's about how much purchasing power you preserve. It's about how well you navigate uncertainty. It's about building a life that remains strong, regardless of which direction the cycle turns next. The people who thrive during major transitions are rarely the ones making the boldest predictions. They're usually the ones who prepared before everyone else realized preparation was necessary. And that may be the most important lesson of all. The greatest risks often emerge gradually. The greatest opportunities often emerge quietly. And the decisions you make today may matter far more than the headlines everyone is watching tomorrow. If you found value in this discussion, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who wants to better understand the forces shaping the future of wealth, markets, and economic cycles. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.